Okay, so thank you everyone for coming to this local plan update webinar. It's very exciting for us to be trying out formats such as this, these Zoom webinars. It's really interesting and good way of getting to communicate with people that you wouldn't necessarily always do. This particular webinar is focused on the placemaking topic and is an opportunity for you to hear a short presentation and ask questions of the team. Kat, if you could just move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Before we begin the webinar properly, I'd just like to take the opportunity to outline the housekeeping arrangements for this session and to explain the format. Catherine's going to go on to a bit more detail about the format of her presentation later. So firstly and foremost, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded publicly on YouTube. And that's primarily for the benefit of others who aren't able to attend today. But over the course of this consultation, we'll be able to watch the recording and hopefully learn some information that they didn't already know to help them in answering the consultation questions. All attendee microphones and videos have been turned off and will remain off. So to ask questions, please use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screens, rather than using the chat function. And the reason for that is because the Q&A allows us to just keep a record of questions to ensure that we've answered them, and we're able to ensure that's the case. So if you could use the Q&A function, that would be great. We'll attempt to answer questions verbally, so that everybody can hear and see what's happening there in terms of those answers. But if we run out of time, we'll make a record and try and email you our responses to those questions. So we've got a 20-minute presentation followed by a Q&A session with the panel. And the panel today, we've got Catherine Holloway, who's the team leader for sites and policies in the Policies and Plans group. We've got Martin Elliott, who's the head of service for strategic planning. We've got myself, Adam Harvat, group manager for policy and plans. And we're also joined by Caroline Harris, who's planning assistant in the policy and plans team, who's helping us to manage the Q&A today. If we just have the next slide, please, Catherine. Thank you. So what is this consultation about? Well, we're consulting on the local plan update, as I said, which will eventually contain a suite of new planning policies to help tackle the climate emergency. This is the earliest stage of consultation, known as a scoping consultation, and this is about seeking agreement on what broad topics should be included in the plan. But it's also an opportunity for us to raise ideas and options with you, rather than detailed policies at this stage, but that will help us create detailed policies in the future. Broadly speaking, what we're looking for as part of this consultation is an understanding of whether people agree with this scope of policies or not, what your thoughts are on some of our ideas and options, and most crucially, your thoughts on whether we've missed anything, whether you think that we're not being ambitious enough, or whether you think that we're being too ambitious and unrealistic. So ideas about things that you think maybe we should have covered, but we don't appear to, and they'd be really ideas that be really gratefully received. So as you know, we're hosting a series of webinars covering the 5 different topic areas individually over the summer to help give you a chance to learn more about the topics and ask any questions that you might have. So today's placemaking, we'll also have flood risk sessions, green infrastructure sessions, and sustainable infrastructure sessions over the coming weeks with daytime and evening slots. We held carbon reduction seminars yesterday, but don't worry if you wanted to see that and you missed it. The recordings for those will be put on our website very shortly. Also, finally, we'd be really grateful for any feedback you have on this webinar. This is the first kind of series that we've done in policy and plans as part of a local plan update consultation. So we're really keen to make sure it's as effective and useful for you as possible. So please use the email address at the bottom if you have any kind of constructive comments you'd like to give us to help us improve in the future. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Catherine, who's going to give us our presentation this evening on the placemaking topic of the local plan update. So over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, today is the placemaking topic area of the Leeds local plan update, and this seeks to explore the policies that guide sustainable patterns of development in Leeds. It considers both strategic placemaking, in other words, the spatial patterns of growth or where the location of development goes, and the issues around strategic infrastructure, and engages in concepts such as the 20-minute neighbourhood, as well as looking at placemaking in reference to detailed design considerations at a site, development and building level. As a topic, placemaking is presented on its own, but it clearly shares links with the other topic areas of the local plan update, scope and consultation, which Adam's referred to. So the intention of the local plan update is to look at how new or amended planning policy can take leads towards carbon neutrality by 2030. And for placemaking, this means guiding new developments to locations that offer the best opportunity for active travel, be that by foot or by cycle, and by public transport, so that travel by car is greatly reduced. And seeking the best opportunity expresses the desire to optimise carbon reduction through control of the location of new development, use of appropriate density, efficient use of land, and the creation of cohesive neighbourhoods. Placemaking, of course, is not new. It's about bringing together the concepts of the recognised 17 global sustainability goals. And as part of our aspiration to make Leeds carbon neutral by 2030, we want to ensure that we guide development to the most sustainable places and ensure that all new development is designed to high standards. As a reminder, the purpose of the planning system, as expressed through the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF, I did a P there, didn't I? The NPPF, is to contribute to the achievement of sustainable development. And the NPPF sets out 3 objectives that broadly contribute to the wider factors that influence sustainable and healthy places. The first, the economic objective, to help build a strong, responsive and competitive economy by ensuring that sufficient land of the right type is available in the right place and at the right time to support growth, innovation and improve productivity, and by identifying and coordinating the provision of infrastructure. The second, the social objective, is to support strong, vibrant and healthy communities by ensuring that a sufficient number and range of homes is provided to meet the needs of the present and future generations, and by fostering well-designed, beautiful and safe places with accessible services and open spaces that reflect current and future needs and support communities' health, social and cultural well-being. And lastly, but no means least, is the environmental objective, to protect and enhance our natural, built and historic environment, including making effective use of land, improving biodiversity and using natural resources prudently, minimising waste and pollution, and mitigating and adapting to climate change, including moving to a low carbon economy. So that's set out at national level. So placemaking at the strategic level is about creating places that support people to live, work and enjoy their environment, incorporating both urban and natural aspects. And done well, placemaking minimises the environmental footprint of development. It brings environmental, economic and social elements of planning together and allows communities to flourish. The current Leeds local plan, through the core strategy, has sought to provide a framework of sustainable and healthy communities, having regard to the quality of life and to protect and enhance the environment. And this is achieved through a strategic and spatial approach and a suite of policies relating to the overall scale and distribution of development, location, layout and fabric of places. The current core strategy policy is structured around a settlement hierarchy of the city centre, main urban area, major settlements and smaller settlements. And through this, new development is channeled towards the urban areas to avoid travel by private car, as sustainable locations because these places have access to a range of services via public transport and walking and cycling. The core strategy guides development towards previously developed land, town centre uses to centres, and economic development towards identified and suitable locations. The Council adopted its site allocations plan in 2019, and this provides for a range of housing and employment allocations, and these in-principle locations for development will not be amended through the local plan update. But the local plan update also allows us to consider the impacts of the last 2 years and the impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on both people and the economy. It's changed the way people work, travel and shop, and it's shown a rise in the number of people cycling and resulted in cleaner air and quieter streets. However, it's also shown widening inequality for those who have easy access and connection to green space and nature and access to shops and services, and those who are disconnected from these important facilities. The physical, economic and social characteristics of housing, places and communities have an important influence over people's physical and mental health and well-being, and inequalities in these are reflected in inequalities in health. Pre-existing characteristics of communities shape their resilience to the social and economic impacts that COVID-19 containment has had. The pandemic has generated contradictory views that people need larger homes, space and greater distances to stay safe, and less reliance on centrally located offices, given the ability of office workers to now work from home. And the lockdown restrictions have reminded us all that placemaking is more important than ever in creating better spaces for everybody, and that our neighbourhoods need to be designed to support people's health and well-being. This means making walking and cycling easier, providing affordable and safe housing, easy and safe access to green spaces, and creating opportunities for neighbours to meet. The 20-minute neighbourhood concept has become a focus for a new vision of locational growth. The purpose of the concept is to ensure that neighbourhoods support strong communities and local economies, recognising that easy and safe walking and cycling access to services and facilities is good for health, and that physical activity and less reliance on the private car reduces air pollution. This approach to local growth and placemaking around service centres and hubs is gathering support across the world and is an easily understood way of planning for the way places change. The concept of locating development in sustainable locations is nothing new in Leeds, and the accessibility standards set out in the core strategy go a long way to setting out the criteria for sustainable development. The concept was further explored in the recently published consultation document, Leeds Local Transport Strategy, which sets out the council's ambition for Leeds to be a city where you don't need to own a car and where everyone has access to affordable zero carbon transport options. So what does this mean for Leeds? Well, for Leeds to meet its objective of minimising carbon emissions, it's considered that spatial growth, in line with the emerging Leeds transport strategy, should continue to follow a pattern of concentration, particularly around the city and town centres, and with less development in relatively unsustainable locations, promoting walkable neighbourhoods. It's also considered that this should apply to the location of general employment in appropriate locations. And in this context, we're scoping how to successfully integrate the 20-minute neighbourhood concept into the Leeds local plan and to guide the determination of planning applications, recognising the challenge this brings to Leeds with its varied neighbourhoods and rural communities. There's also an opportunity to ensure that the key principles of sustainable development and strategic placemaking, supporting the climate emergency targets and ambitions, aligned with health and well-being and inclusive growth, are further highlighted and strengthened and are front and centre in the local plan. So through this consultation, we are exploring whether the Leeds core strategy policies on the locational criteria for non-allocated, i.e. windfall development, alongside accessibility requirements, which expects new development to be of a scale appropriate to the capacity of local infrastructure, should and can be strengthened, recognising that the most sustainable urban form is one of concentration of uses, particularly around centres, so that people can be closer to work and other services and make use of public transport. We also want to understand how people view the 20-minute neighbourhood concept, recognising the challenge this brings to Leeds, and that a one-size-fits-all approach will not work for all our unique neighbourhoods and rural communities. Should we therefore only focus the 20-minute neighbourhood as a strategic objective around strategic hubs, such as a transport interchange, like a bus station or railway, or town and local centres? And expanding on the local transport strategy consultation and reflecting upon the recent changes to the Highway Code, which introduces the hierarchy of responsibility aligned with the hierarchy of road users, we're also asking a series of questions around how planning policy might influence or require car-free development and how streets are designed and used. I'll move now to the second part of this topic area, which focuses down more to sort of the detailed design considerations of buildings and sites. The evidence for high quality and sustainable places is qualitative. However, the many reports on climate emergency return to quality of place being central to achieving well-designed places that respond to the impacts of climate change through mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and minimising embodied energy, and adaptation, such as rising temperatures and increased risk of flooding. And examples of the type of design features to facilitate this at a site and building level are provided on screen. The Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, the MHCLG, published the National Design Guide, Planning Practice Guidance for Beautiful, Enduring and Successful Places in October 2019. This makes clear that creating high quality buildings and places is fundamental to what the planning and development process should achieve. The MHCLG have followed this by publishing in July this year changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF. The text has been revised to implement policy changes in response to the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission Living with Beauty report, alongside the publication of a National Model Design Code and establishing an Office of Place within the government to lead on embedding beauty, high quality design and placemaking into the planning system. The changes to the NPPF help ensure the planning system creates more attractive buildings and places. The changes include making beauty and placemaking a strategic policy in the framework, setting an expectation that local authorities produce their own design codes and guides, setting out design principles which new development in their areas should reflect, that local authorities should ensure that new streets are tree-lined, that improvements to biodiversity and access to nature is created through design, and that an emphasis on granting planning permission for well-designed development and refusing it for poor quality schemes. The Leeds Local Plan has sought to provide a framework for sustainable and healthy communities, having regard to the quality of life and to protect and enhance the environment. And all development proposals are subject to a suite of specific and more detailed placemaking policies on the layout and fabric of places, covering use, design, natural environment, green space, public realm, and transport. And in the context of both climate change and health and well-being, well-designed places have layouts, forms, and mixes of use that reduce the requirements on resources, be that land, energy, or water, assisting in increasing the ability of CO2 absorption, sustaining natural ecosystems, and minimising flood risk and potential for flooding and reducing overheating and pollution. That they take advantage of topography and layout, achieving passive solar gain, retaining and planting new trees for shade and urban heating and carbon capture, and other biodiversity opportunities, such as the creation or retention of hedgerows, green walls, roofs and ponds, and access to healthy food and food sustainability. And that places are fit for purpose and are adaptable, providing and linking to sustainable transport, walking and cycling, and promotion of safe, walkable and accessible for all developments. And that the 20-minute neighbourhoods where daily needs are met locally. This is not only critical for low carbon and healthy future, but also for creating resilient places in light of the pandemic. And lastly, designing out crime, creating open, well-lit, observable places, as this has a positive impact on mental health and well-being. Leeds' current core strategy sets out the requirements for all development to consider development management considerations and design principles, and these are well established and well used policies and are supplemented by detailed design guidance in the Neighbourhoods for Living and Building for Today, Tomorrow, Sustainable Construction Supplementary Planning Guides. And in line with the NPPF, the determination of planning applications needs to be considered against the development plan and all development control considerations. And as such, existing policy provides guidance on matters such as acceptable land use, mix, type, density, affordability, space standards for new homes, alongside green space, public realm, green and blue infrastructure, connectivity, accessibility, surface and foul water sewer disposal, car parking, detailed design considerations, which all when read together, help to inform and shape placemaking. Again, through the consultation, we are asking specific questions on design and placemaking. And we considered that in Leeds, placemaking lacks strategic weight, and this consultation seeks to ask whether Leeds needs, in light of the recent changes to national planning policy, to strengthen and heighten the policy hooks and requirements to ensure that explicit referencing to health and wellbeing and climate emergency benefits are foremost in mind when development comes forward, and that well-designed and high-quality places are achieved. I'll end my presentation there and I will open for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I hope the attendees found that helpful. Caroline, I noticed we've got a few questions already in the Q&A function. I don't know if you're able to take us through those.
I am, yeah, thanks, Adam. So the first one, an attendee lives on the Leeds-Bradford boundary. How will the plan be coordinated with Bradford? And I think we can probably extend that to other neighbours, North Yorkshire, Selby, Wakefield, etc.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's an important aspect of plan making, is what we call the duty. Sorry, get my words out. The duty to cooperate, and it's something that we have to do on a regular basis with all kind of adjoining authorities and also sort of major statutory consultees. So we work very closely with colleagues in Bradford, but also obviously in Wakefield and Selby and other adjoining authorities, so that we're all abreast of each other's plans. Obviously, inevitably, we're often at different stages of plan making, and I know that Bradford, I believe, are close to, I think they may have submitted their plan or very close to submitting their plan. Martin's nodding, so I think they've submitted their plan and due to have examination on that very shortly. But yes, we will ensure that we continue to be in good dialogue to make sure that we're coordinating with our colleagues across borders. I don't know if anyone else on the panel wanted to add anything to that.
Thanks, Adam. And yeah, you're right to draw attention to the duty to cooperate, which is mainly to ensure that what are called strategic planning matters are dealt with across boundaries. And as you know, carbon doesn't stop at the boundary. And many of the other parts of this local plan update around strategic transport will directly involve working more closely with neighbouring authorities. The other thing to bear in mind is that Leeds sits within the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, which has its own climate emergency declaration, albeit to 2038 for carbon neutrality for all of the West Yorkshire authorities. So in a sense, Leeds and what's being progressed here through this local plan update is being seen as a bit of a sort of a pioneering authority within the within West Yorkshire, and certainly through our routes, such as duty to cooperate, we will be sharing the successes and the learning lessons from this process with Bradford, Wakefield, Kirklees and Calderdale.
Thanks, Adam and Martin. We have a couple of people who are very supportive of the 20-minute neighbourhood concept, but someone is concerned that current developments are quite a long way away from that, specifically east of Otley. The question is, why is there such a discrepancy, and how far is the gap from now to where we'd like to go?
Okay, that's a really interesting and useful question. Thank you. I think if I can tackle Otley, and it's sort of direct. It's a market town. It's got its own very successful centre, and the Otley allocation is a long-standing allocation to meet housing needs for the city, and it is within easily walking distance of the town centre. I think if you were looking at that centre or settlement as 20-minute neighbourhood to Leeds, then clearly it is not, and that is the challenge that we have to meet in Leeds, is that we cannot apply a 20-minute neighbourhood to all our neighbourhoods across the city. All our places are unique, they're different, they all have their own opportunities and constraints in terms of access. What the 20-minute neighbourhood is trying to achieve is ensuring that where possible, we are giving opportunity to access local services within your local community. 20 minutes is seen to be the ideal catchment to achieve that, and focused on active travel, be that walking or cycling. Clearly, if you're cycling, you can get a little bit further, subject to your ability on a bike and how hilly it is. But there are other considerations about access to public transport hubs, and good connectivity. And I think that's where we align very closely to the vision within the local transport strategy, and making sure that people have access to good, safe, frequent public transport choices, and not relying on the car. Now, clearly, there are challenges to the rural neighbourhoods and communities that we have within Leeds, and looking at the role of places and the role and function that those settlements can provide. So yeah, very, very interesting question, and something that we're still grappling with ourselves in terms of how we actually apply 20 minutes across the board. I think also as well, it's quite interesting to apply this to, or apparent that we can apply this to new development, and that we can't retrospect it to our existing communities.
Thanks, Catherine. Did any of the other panelists want to add anything?
I think just to say that I fully understand from the from local residents' perspective that these policies, as they relate to improving places and making development better, you might not necessarily think you're seeing that in some of the current proposals that are coming through. And I think there's two things to say on that. One is the council already has a suite of existing policies around design, around a lot of the things that Catherine's outlined, which we use to and negotiate with developers in terms of improving their schemes now. But the way that the current planning system is set up, is that very much the priority for development at the moment is around the delivery of housing and housing numbers. That is changing. It's changing through government changes to national guidance. They've recently changed national guidance to reflect the importance of beauty through design, for example. And those changes are really important at a national level to help us land local policy changes that help prioritize and promote these sorts of policies that we're talking about. So as national guidance, from our perspective, improves to focus on these wider issues, we can use more and have more weight in terms of trying to bring these sorts of policies to bear. But at the moment, we're using the existing policies that we've got to determine planning applications, and that's only right, because developers need security and surety in terms of their investment decisions, and a lot of long-term planning goes into delivery of sites. So it is a bit of a transition. But I can understand from a resident's point of view that you'd be disappointed that some of these very progressive policies aren't being implemented now.
Thanks, Martin. Right, next question. Site allocations not being updated in this process. Can people responding to this consultation ask that they are? Do these need changing in light of the climate emergency? Are they still appropriate?
I'm happy to take that one. I'm happy to take that one because I was heavily involved in the site allocations process. So the site allocations aren't being updated because they form part of the council's adopted plan. And as I've just said, it's important to have that adopted plan because that sets out that Leeds can meet its housing requirement that has been set in an objective manner through its core strategy. Now, the ability to demonstrate that you can meet your housing requirement is really important, because if you can't do that, current government guidance penalises local authorities, and those local authorities then lose control over where new housing development can arise. Now, that is a situation that Leeds found itself in a short period of time ago, where it lost lots of planning appeals on greenfield sites which it hadn't intended to bring forward for development. So in order to not find ourselves in that situation again, and in order to bring security and certainty to the delivery of housing, which remains a key priority for the council, to meet housing need, bring forward affordable housing, bring forward a mix of housing to meet the needs of younger and older people. So in order to do that, we need certainty and security in terms of our allocations for housing. So those have been fixed. Now, that's not to say that the policies that we're bringing forward here can't apply to those allocations as they come forward over time, and certainly the larger allocations as they build out, and any what are called reserved matters, because what happens on very large sites is developers will apply for planning permission in principle over sort of strategic matters in what's called outline, and then more detailed planning applications may get submitted in due course. Now, as this plan progresses, and as it gets to submission stage, it will gather more weight in the process and be able to be used in part to determine planning applications. So we can see some of these policies have an impact on, and we will see some of these policies have an impact on existing site allocations. But what we also need to do is plan for the long term in Leeds. There'll be a need for continued delivery of housing in Leeds, and what these policies are doing is shaping where those really the most sustainable locations are going to be to guide any future allocations that the council makes.
Thanks, Martin. Next question. It's another question about East of Otley, concerned that it fails on carbon and biodiversity and would count as poor in the National Design Guide, meaning every house would need retrofitting immediately. The attendee says we possibly can't comment on that.
Well, yeah, it's a live planning application. It needs to be determined by the local planning authority. We are aware of those issues, and those issues have been raised through the consultation on that application. I think that's all we can say at this stage.
Thanks, Catherine. How much of placemaking can we insist on or support co-production of places if it's just developer-led for profit and it's hard to achieve the full benefits? Can we bring co-production processes into placemaking in future Leeds planning policy?
Very interesting question. Yes, I think the creation of successful placemaking is a collaboration. It's about bringing all aspects of, as I said in the presentation, economic, social and environmental aspects together. So there are crossovers, that there are the interplays between the transport infrastructure, other infrastructure, so through sort of health and well-being, be it the sort of the physical or the natural environment. So we are working with colleagues within the city centre, within the city council, not just the city centre, within the city council, to look at that sort of cross-service delivery of places. That's very key to creating. You can't create a place in isolation in a bubble. All these aspects come together and need to come together and delivered through as I'm going to say it again, collaboration. And it's about making our policies stronger so that developers appreciate and apply these policies to create the places that we want to achieve in Leeds. I hope that's answered the question.
Thank you, Catherine. I was just going to add a further point, because I think it's a really important question, and the issue of being developer-led for profit is obviously one that I think makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And I don't know if anyone had seen some reports that have been done earlier in the year, but the kind of lack of trust that the public have in the development industry, and also, you know, the local planning authorities as well. And one of the primary reasons for that was seen that development was for profit rather than for improving places, and that community links just didn't seem to be happening. And there's a real tension there, because we have to be able to demonstrate that our plans and the policies that we have within them are shown to be viable. So it has to be shown that a developer can make a reasonable return on an investment and use all the policies that we have in the plan. And so what we do is have what's called a strategic viability assessment as part of the plan making process, to show that these policies are not unrealistic, that they can be achieved and that they are viable. And that's an absolutely key part of plan making. But it's also a difficulty and a limitation, perhaps, on ambitions, if we do have to make, you know, these demonstrations of viability. However, I think a lot of the work that we've done would suggest that some of these interventions don't need to come at great cost. A lot of them are actually cost neutral if development is considered early enough, and the design of development is considered early enough about aspects. You know, like things like solar gain and the use of materials. They don't necessarily need to come at a huge cost to developers, but they do need to think about them well in advance. And if they do that and pay the right amount for land, as Catherine says, with a full intention of complying with full policies, then we can hopefully get to a situation where all these policies can be implemented and be shown to be viable as well.
Thanks, Adam. Somebody is concerned that a major defect is the inability to retrofit existing areas to achieve 20-minute neighbourhoods. Does anyone have a comment on that?
Just to reiterate that, yeah, we recognise that is a substantial challenge for us to Leeds. You know, that there will be areas of Leeds that don't meet currently a 20-minute neighbourhood concept, and it's very difficult for us to retrofit that. But it's looking at that broader holistic sort of strategic pattern of growth, and where that growth is directed to, making sure that we're not repeating that pattern.
I think that's right. And if I can, I mean, I think the thing to get across here is that you can't deliver 20-minute neighbourhoods without growth and without greater density of development being brought forward in the way that Catherine outlined. So I think the outcomes are going to be delivered through growth as a lever of investment within the city. And that's what Leeds as a city council has the opportunity to capture. And then once it's done that, through a sort of a design first approach to house building, which really ensures that the house building is about the place, not the numbers. It can then look to other opportunities to pull together strategic funding, the work of other partners, the work of people who manage existing spaces, maybe outside of the planning system, to sort of address some of those other issues around places, so that then they can in turn tap into the benefits that are being brought from that new growth, and benefit from that. And that's quite complicated, and that requires, as Catherine's already outlined, working across a number of different departments within the council, but also external partners responsible for delivering some of the infrastructure which the council simply isn't responsible for delivering.
I think as well, you know, if we're certainly not wanting to close down the debate on what the 20-minute neighbourhood concept could be in Leeds. So I think if people reading the material feel I think Leeds have closed down that conversation too early. We'd like, you'd like us to consider how it could be applied to existing communities. We'd really love your ideas on that. It'd be really interesting to explore. And whilst it's not in the material at the moment, I think one of the ideas that we'd currently been discussing was whether if you categorize places of how well they meet the 20-minute neighborhood. So you might say that the city centre fully addresses that. That's a 10 out of 10 kind of 20-minute neighbourhood. And some of our other sort of larger towns and some of our suburbs may also get sort of 8 or 9s out of 10s, maybe even 10s out of 10s. But other areas may be much lower on that scale, that they don't have a series of different facilities that you would say they would need if they were going to be a 20-minute neighbourhood. So what could we do to address that? As Martin said, it's hard to respond to it without growth. We can allocate land for, say, a shop or an office use, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it would be attractive for people to deliver that. But what we could do perhaps as an option is something like, well, for areas that are scoring lowly in terms of 20-minute neighbourhoods, if development is proposed in those areas, that it would have to provide additional facilities, far more perhaps, say, than something in the city centre that wouldn't need to provide additional facilities because they're already there. So that might be a way of trying to address some of those areas that don't have or don't meet that 20-minute neighbourhood at the moment. But so we're really keen to explore kind of ideas on that. So as I say, if people wanted to raise through the consultation comments and say, look, I don't think Leeds has gone far enough here, please let's explore that a bit further. We'd love to hear from you on that.
Thanks, Adam. One of the attendees also attended the carbon reduction webinar yesterday and asked about training needs both for council staff and also builders and developers. Placemaking seems more holistic and quite challenging to put all the different aspects together, requiring early and thorough training opportunities. Do you agree?
Simple answer would be yes. Yeah, I mean, covered in the presentation, placemaking is bringing together a whole host of planning policy aspects, both in the consideration of climate emergency, health and well-being, but in terms of sort of access, connectivity, biodiversity. It is pulling all these strands together. So it is a holistic approach to planning. That is why we have the planning system. That is the aim and objectives since the introduction of the Town and Country Planning Act back in the 1940s, as a sort of realisation of looking at the creation of safe, healthy places in light of the sort of the effects of industrialisation. So that's why we are planners. That's how we try to pull this all together. Yes, there are considerable training needs, and I think specifically for the carbon reduction, that's a very technical aspect of what we're trying to achieve through policy. That is sort of setting specific standards to how buildings are built and how they operate in terms of carbon reduction. But yes, I think the simple answer was yes. I don't know if the other panelists want to come in and confirm that.
Yeah, I mean, I recognise that. I mean, and I am I'm pleased that it's recognised as well by participants in this, because we as planners, as you say, Catherine, we've got quite a broad discipline that seeks to pull together a number of different disciplines at the same time around biodiversity, nature conservation, flood risk, social infrastructure, health and well-being, green space, and this topic in particular enables us to shape policies that change cultural thinking within the development industry, I think, because what we want developers to do is relatively straightforward, which is approach a site not from the perspective of how many homes can you get on that site to make the biggest profit, but how would you ideally construct a place in order to meet a wide range of sustainable objectives, that then in turn ensure that you have a much speedier, swifter, simpler progression through the planning system, and that the place that you then eventually come to market and the properties you sell are far more respected and appreciated by the occupants of those properties. Now, that's actually a bit of a cultural shift, and there are many developers out there who are sort of already on that journey and already working towards their definitions of sustainability, and working on marketing different aspects of that to their customers. And we want to grab all of that good practice. And if you know of any good practice, and if you just simply know of a place that you like and you'd like to live, tell us about what makes that a good place. Tell us about the attributes of it that you would like to see being brought forward in Leeds, because that demonstrates that this can be done, because somebody's taken the decision to invest in that and construct that. And we are going to grab all of that good practice and experience and expertise and try and consolidate that together through the policies that we're going to seek to prepare and consult on again in the future.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Catherine and Martin has said. I think the only thing just to add, because I think it's a really interesting question about kind of training needs and the challenge that provides, is probably the national picture, which I think the attendee also mentioned in one of his other questions as well, about the government's kind of position on this as well. And I think we're seeing a lot of work by government, particularly on things like design coding, which my interpretation of that is that's a way of hoping to simplify the implementation of good design, so that it becomes, dare I say it, a fairly tick box approach, so that we work with, I mean, it's a question that came up earlier about working with communities to establish design codes that then is agreed by that community, and then with a kind of certain knowledge that when development comes in, if it doesn't meet those standards, that it will be refused, but if it does, it will be approved. And that gives certainty to communities about those standards, but also to the development industry, that they know what they have to do. And also, perhaps that system, which obviously we haven't seen implemented yet in England, perhaps that system helps with training to a degree as well, because it's an attempt to try and simplify what is clearly very complicated. We don't know how that's going to play out yet, but it's clearly all part of this placemaking discussion.
Thank you to all the panel there. We've got no questions at the moment, so while you've got us here, if anyone has anything further to ask, please put them in the Q&A.
Caroline, I just picked up that there is there's one in the chat, and it's about what about the empty homes in Leeds? And I think that's a good question, because there have been quite a significant number of empty homes that were long-term empty for more than 6 months across Leeds. But certainly over the last 10 years, Leeds has had an empty homes strategy where it's tried to bring those back into use again. And now I think the level of empty homes in the city at one point was over 10,000, and it's now down to a handful of thousands, which represents just over 1% of the housing stock as a whole in terms of long-term empty homes. And some of those empty homes have been brought back into use through finance and funding. And some of those empty homes have been repurposed as council homes, which with very high standards of carbon efficiency. So the council does seek to address the level of empty homes in the city. It's not something that planning directly affects, because a home has already got planning permission to be a home. So any change that happens to that home doesn't require planning permission unless it goes to a different use. But it is something that the council, through its other activities, is addressing.
Thanks, Martin. We've got no other questions at the moment. Do any of the panel have anything else they'd like to say before we finish?
Well, I think we've got 2 more questions into the.
Oh yes.
So I think one of them again, I think, is about east of Otley. If I just find it. So yeah, I think concerns that I assume this relates to kind of design standards, concerns that we've moved backwards from what was earlier agreed. I don't know, Catherine, if you had any further comments on that. I mean, obviously, just to reiterate,
I think
not
we just have
to comment on live planning applications.
I think that has to be the point, I'm afraid, and I think we just encourage you to make your comments to the case officer who's dealing with that planning application, and in due course, panel advised by council officers will take a view on that planning application.
I think just to add to that the Otley neighbourhood plan is in place, and I think that demonstrates the importance of local engagement with planning issues, particularly around design. They've got a very detailed policy for the mixed use allocation at east of Otley, and that will be taken into consideration through the determination of the live planning application.
Thanks, Catherine. We have a suggestion that we need to be more creative about ways to achieve the 20-minute neighbourhood, such as a heat map or contour map of distance to facilities from all houses.
Love that idea. Yes, that's great. Utilising mapping and GIS tools. That there are heat maps that are available out there that look at population density. That those tools are available to us, and we will be using those. But yeah, I really like that suggestion. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Right, I think we've covered all the questions for now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can hang on, but just in case we don't have any further questions, just like to thank all of the attendees for turning up tonight. It's really much appreciated, giving your own personal time to attend these sessions. Some really interesting questions and comments, which will certainly help us as we formulate more detailed policies, particularly like ideas about us being more creative, more ambitious. And I think that's always very welcome. It's important for us to be positively pushed on these things as we try and be as ambitious as we can be. So yeah, I just wanted to thank all the attendees for giving up their valuable time, but particularly also like to thank the panelists, particularly Catherine for her presentation, but also to Martin as well, and obviously thank you very much to Caroline for managing the Q&A. I think we've just got one little message that's come up. Oh, so thank you. So yeah, well, you're all very welcome. Thank you, thank you very much. I don't see any more questions, so I think we can call it a day there. But as I say, thank you very much for your attendance. It's very much appreciated, and I will end the webinar now. So enjoy the rest of your evenings. Bye-bye.